back on the GoGamecocks.com college football preview video. We're going to talk about the Gamecocks schedule this year. What we're not talking about this year, unlike the last 2 years, is how South Carolina has a tougher schedule than SEC's counterpart Georgia.
They got a break this year.
This year it's Georgia that's got a little bit of tougher road to hoe. So can South Carolina take advantage of it? We'll talk about some of the highlights of that schedule, but it opens up fast. It opens up with North Carolina on a Thursday night in Williams-Brice. Ought to be a great game. Ought to be loud. For me, playing a team like North Carolina, Larry Fedora, second year, they're very excited. You know, they've spent all summer talking about how things are going to be different. They're turning it around. This is as confident and as well prepared as the Tar Heels are going to be. Mm-hmm. So that's not an easy game. They're going to play fast. They're going to throw some tricks at you, you know for a fact. But the fact of the matter is, for at least for my money, South Carolina is top to bottom maybe not much more, but a more talented team and should win that game. Then you go to week 2 in Athens against a Georgia team that you've beaten 3 in a row. Only the last 2 years to watch them go on and represent the SEC East in the title game. Now, Georgia will have to play LSU. They'll still have to play Florida. So the tables could be turned this year. Still, South Carolina wants to make that 4 in a row. A Georgia team that will play much differently than North Carolina will be much more physical. You'll have to switch gears quickly. I think it's a huge benefit to South Carolina to be playing their first game on Thursday night and have extra time to prepare for the Bulldogs. After the Bulldogs, we get to Vanderbilt. David and I sort of disagree on the Vandy game. For my money, South Carolina, that's a walk game for South Carolina. But David, you disagree?
Absolutely, Josh. I mean, Vanderbilt is obviously not your daddy's Vanderbilt. You know, they won 9 games last year. And despite losing a lot of talent, despite having some off-the-field issues this past summer, it's still going to be Vanderbilt. They believe that they can shock the world and win another 8-9 games, maybe even 10. They believe that they can challenge for the East. Whether that's feasible or not, we'll find out. My thing is, if South Carolina loses to either North Carolina or Georgia, I agree with you. They'll roll Vanderbilt. Yeah. They'll beat them so bad they'll be on the bus to Nashville by halftime. But if they go 2-0, they're feeling confident. They got a leg up in the East by beating Georgia. Vanderbilt comes in here and they might think, well, we got this now. We just got to keep in control until we play the big game at Arkansas, at Florida. Vandy's liable to trip them up. So, I mean, not likely because it's a home game.
Right.
But the fact is, especially if they start 2-0, I can see that being a huge stub-the-toe kind of game, kind of like Auburn was in 2011, which ended up costing them a chance at the SEC championship.
Well, you're right about that, and they will have to pay attention. And then you move to the sort of the middle third of the season, which is marked by those 3 straight trips on the road. Mm-hmm. You go to Arkansas, you go to Tennessee, and you go to Missouri. Not just 3 road trips, but the first one and the last one are long road trips.
Rough trip.
None of those 3 teams you figure to be world beaters, but Arkansas will be okay under Brett Bielema, I think. Tennessee is fired up under a first-year head coach in Butch Jones. Missouri, I don't think, can be the train wreck they were last year. For my money, it is the grind of that back-to-back-to-back long road trips. How prepared is this team? How tough is this team mentally? How healthy is this team at that time? I think that there are a lot of questions. When you look at that Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri game, is there something that jumps out at you?
Oh, yes, sir. I mean, Josh, it's just a very, very tough thing to do. And, they did get a break by not having to play in Alabama or LSU this year, but they sure didn't get any favors on this. The way I look at it, Josh, if they're flying high, they should be able to handle that stretch. But I think they're going to lose 1 game, and of those most likely, Arkansas.
Right.
Arkansas, it's first-year coach. It's kind of a brand new team from the system that Bobby Petrino had, and then the John L. Smith experiment. But it's still Arkansas at Arkansas, and
right.
USC just simply does not play well out there. We've seen it throughout the years. It's just not a good place they feel comfortable in. Not a lot of fans go to it because it's 860 miles away from Columbia.
Right.
It's just a very tough place to play. I can see that being a loss. I'm not afraid to say it, not a flex game, but I think that they're going to lose that game. And then after they lose that one, I think they'll be fired up, go and beat Tennessee. And then Missouri, I think it's just a talent issue. No matter how cold it'll be, they should beat that team.
They should. Last third of the season, you finally get some payback for all those road games in the top 2/3. Florida, November 16th in Williams-Brice. If you're the Gamecocks, what you hope is that you're playing for the SEC East title that day. You're hoping to clinch the SEC East title. We'll see if it works out that way. Regardless, it'll be a big game. That, for my money, was the game that was just you can take nothing from last year's game and carry it over to this year's game. Florida was plus 15 in turnover margin last year. For my money, that's a huge reason they won as many games as they did. It's certainly the reason they won the South Carolina game as definitively as they did. That game's a throwaway game to me. The teams are much closer than 44-11, so I'm much more interested to see how this game turns out. And, certainly if you're playing for the East, Williams-Brice will be electric. It will almost certainly be at night if you're in that situation. So I think if you're a South Carolina fan, you hope that November 16th is a huge game.
Absolutely, Josh. I mean, it's one of those. You could be playing for the SEC East, or you could be playing just to up the win total. You hope to be playing for the SEC East. And honestly, if they beat Georgia, and then even if they lose to Arkansas, they'll still have the tiebreaker. Right. So they should be able to say, we might not go undefeated, but we can finish 7-1. We got to get some payback. They were a much better team last year than they showed down at the Swamp. Florida had 180 yards of offense, and they won by 33 points. That's just a ridiculous statistic.
Ridiculous.
So you get past that, and hopefully you have an SEC championship trip in tow, and you roll right into that non-conference game against Coastal Carolina, and then, of course, Clemson comes to town the very next week.
And, so much of what we've talked about on these previews and so much of what I hear South Carolina fans talking about is the SEC East race. But 5 in a row against Clemson would feel awful good to people here. And just to say South Carolina's going for 5 in a row against Clemson this year feels awful good. Statistically, Clemson's going to win at some points. Clemson's got Taj Boyd. Clemson's got Sammy Watkins, who they feel like will be back to the old Sammy Watkins. I think it's going to be a dogfight. 3 months out, I'm not prepared to predict that game.
No.
But I hope it's a good game, and I hope that it sort of lives up to some of the stuff we've seen in the last 4 years.
Sure, Josh, couldn't agree more. South Carolina will lose to Clemson eventually. I don't know if it'll be this year. I don't know if it'll be 10 years from now. I never thought I'd see the day where South Carolina beat Clemson 4 years in a row, much less have a chance for 5. But the fact is, Josh, you look at the situation. Are you only playing for pride? Right. Is the SEC not a possibility anymore? South Carolina comes back out real fired up, tries to get that rivalry win. If you're looking ahead to Atlanta next week, maybe you're not as concentrated. Maybe if you're playing for a national championship, you could be. But here's another thing. What if Clemson comes in here 11-0? If they get past Georgia, there's nobody else who's going to beat them. Could be playing to knock your rival out of the national championship picture because, as we both know, the ACC is so weak, it doesn't matter if you win the conference title. You've got to win those 2 non-conference games against Georgia, against South Carolina, for the Tigers to be going to Pasadena. So that could, enter as a factor. Right now, I just group that in the flex kind of games. I have no idea who to call right now because you just don't know what's going to happen. But it should be a huge atmosphere regardless of the situation.
I agree. We'll be back to talk about 5 key questions for the 2013 season.